At his funeral, a canine dog broke free, and what he did next made every soldier cry. But that was just the beginning, because Max wasn't done serving his partner. Not even death could break that bond. If you believe some love never dies, stay with this story. The wind swept low across the plains of North Carolina, dragging with it the scent of pine and iron as it slipped between the hangars of Fort Liberty. The autumn sky above was a dull slate gray, threatening rain but holding back as if out of respect for the soldiers marching below. The chill in the air wasn't biting, it was steady, a firm hand on the shoulder reminding everyone that the season was changing. Inside the K-9 training compound, a large structure tucked behind the main barracks, Sergeant Aaron Walker stood with arms crossed, his square jaw locked in silent disapproval. Aaron was a man of structure and habit, forged in the fires of 2 deployments and stitched together by duty. His 37-year-old frame bore the weathering of war, a tall build, lean from years of combat drills, with crow's feet beginning to show at the edges of storm-gray eyes. His brown hair, once thick, was trimmed short and beginning to thin at the temples. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was more out of reflex than warmth. War had taken friends, taken sleep, and most recently, taken his belief in anything that couldn't shoot back. That's why he stood rigidly now, eyeing the German shepherd in front of him with clear skepticism. Max, 3 years old, was the epitome of K-9 precision. His sable coat shimmered in layers of black and deep tan, his ears erect like radar dishes, and his amber eyes darted from handler to target with sharp intelligence. Built for endurance and obedience, Max was silent, watchful, and terrifyingly calm. His previous handler had retired early after a spinal injury, and Max had refused to eat for days afterward. The animal had fought in drills as fiercely as any man, and now, he was being assigned to Aaron. "Sergeant Walker," said Lieutenant Jenny Hartford, standing beside the animal. Jenny, mid-40s, compact and sharp as the creases in her uniform, was the lead K-9 handler at the base. Her no-nonsense tone cut through the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. "Meet your new partner. His name is Max. He doesn't talk back, doesn't flinch, and follows orders better than most boots." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a dog guy, Lieutenant." Jenny smiled thinly. "He's not a dog. He's a soldier." With a sigh that sounded more like a growl, Aaron stepped forward. Max didn't move. His body was a coiled spring, still and waiting. Aaron held his hand out, palm low. Max sniffed it once, then looked away. There was no instant connection, no miracle moment. Just silence between 2 hardened souls. Later that afternoon, training began. The obstacle course was lined with gravel, mock explosives, and scent markers. Aaron followed the protocol, hand signals, whistle commands, voice tones. Max responded, but coldly, precisely, like a machine built of muscle and memory. He scaled walls, leapt through tires, sniffed out planted satchels in a buried pit. Aaron watched him, impressed in spite of himself. In the background, another group of trainees ran parallel drills. Among them was Private Mason Rivera, just 19, fresh-faced and always running 2 steps too slow. Mason had wide brown eyes, curly black hair he couldn't keep under control, and a nervous energy that made him both endearing and prone to errors. He'd joined the army after his father died of cancer, hoping to make something of himself. But boot camp had been merciless. During a simulated breach exercise, a smoke bomb misfired near Mason. Panicking, he stumbled into a ditch just as another cadet tripped, knocking a dummy grenade loose. It rolled toward Mason's leg, sparking. Aaron, observing from across the field, moved without thought. He vaulted the fence, slid down the embankment, and pulled Mason up with one hand, shielding him as the grenade released a loud, non-lethal flash. Dust settled. Mason trembled. "You want to die in training, Private?" Aaron barked, his voice thunder without lightning. "No, sir." Mason gasped. "Then stop treating this like a game." But something shifted. From that day forward, Mason followed Aaron like a shadow. He began mimicking his movements, asking questions, and even staying behind to observe Max. At first, Aaron brushed him off. But Mason's persistence wore him down. During one late afternoon drill, Aaron caught Mason sitting near Max's kennel, gently feeding him bits of leftover protein bar. "He's not your pet," Aaron called. "I know," Mason said. "He's your partner. I just figured, even soldiers like snacks." Aaron didn't smile, but that night, he found Max waiting at the gate instead of lying in his usual distant corner. Over the next few weeks, the bond between man and dog slowly forged itself, not with fanfare, but with steady heat. Aaron began to trust Max's signals. When they cleared buildings together, Aaron no longer second-guessed Max's stares or sniffs. Max started sitting beside Aaron at meals, walking in sync, and sleeping curled near his bunk. The dog who had once grieved his former handler now shadowed Aaron like an echo of purpose. One night, as rain drummed against the windows of the barracks, Aaron sat with a mug of stale coffee. Mason knocked and entered without waiting for permission. He held a photo, one of Aaron, Max, and the unit, taken during a training op. "You think he remembers his last partner?" Mason asked. Aaron looked at Max, then back at Mason. "I think he never forgot." Max lay near their feet, ears twitching, tail still. Thunder cracked distantly. Aaron reached down, placed a steady hand on Max's head, and for the first time, Max didn't flinch, he leaned into it. The next morning, Aaron logged into the K9 mission board and checked the box next to "Mission Ready." The sun hung like a molten coin above the arid plains of northeastern Syria, casting long, rippling shadows across the dusty outpost known as FOB Harlow. The air was sharp with heat, heavy with sand, and the scent of diesel and gunmetal drifted endlessly through the windless sky. Sergeant Aaron Walker stood beside a sandbag wall, his rifle slung across his chest, scanning the jagged horizon beyond the perimeter wire. His uniform clung to him with sweat, his jaw taut, eyes narrowed under the brim of his helmet. Max, his K9 partner, sat obediently at his side, tongue lolling slightly, his coat already tinted with the desert's reddish dust. Deployment had changed the tempo of their lives. Gone were the rigid drills and sterilized training grounds of Fort Liberty. Here, every sound could mean death. Every vibration underfoot could be a trap. Aaron had adjusted quickly, he always did, but this was Max's first combat mission in a real war zone. At 3 years old, the German Shepherd had already been trained for explosives, patrol, and tracking. But even the best training couldn't mimic the madness of actual warfare. Still, Max never hesitated. His stride was always firm, his eyes always alert. Nearby, Private Mason Rivera moved through a column of soldiers preparing for a village sweep. His posture was stiffer than usual, his right hand nervously adjusting the strap of his body armor every few seconds. The desert heat had drained the humor from his face, leaving his boyish features lined with tension. Yet he walked near Aaron and Max, never far. Mason had insisted on being deployed with Aaron's unit. Command had hesitated, he was still considered green, but his performance during drills and his unusual bond with Max had earned him a spot. Captain Elias Monroe, the field commander, emerged from the command tent, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a sun-scorched complexion and eyes like flint. He was efficient, respected, and carried a constant air of quiet pressure, like a storm waiting behind sandbags. He briefed the team on the next sweep, an abandoned village suspected to be a weapons cache. Aaron, Max, Mason, and 4 others would go in on foot. The operation began at dusk. Shadows stretched like claws across the valley as they approached the crumbling outskirts of Al-Basir, a once bustling farming village now silent and hollow. Max moved ahead of the team, muzzle low, ears pricked. Aaron followed just behind, rifle raised. Mason kept pace, breathing through his mouth, trying not to think too hard. Inside a crumbling home with blown-out walls, Max suddenly halted. His body tensed, tail rigid, and he let out a low, guttural growl. Aaron froze. "IED," he mouthed, motioning for the rest of the unit to halt. Mason crouched low, clutching his rifle tightly. They had just begun to redirect when the trap was sprung, not from beneath, but from the rooftops. Gunfire erupted, followed by the high-pitched whistling of an incoming RPG. The explosion sent sand and debris in every direction. Aaron hit the ground, dazed. His ears rang. His vision blurred. Max barked furiously, circling him, then clamped his teeth onto Aaron's tactical vest and began dragging him out of the collapsing room as the ceiling gave way in flames. Aaron tried to push himself up, but his legs were numb. The fire licked closer, smoke clawing into his throat. Max didn't stop. His muscles strained, claws tearing into the earth as he pulled Aaron toward a broken side exit. Outside, the other soldiers had engaged the ambushers, bullets cracking in the open air. Max dragged Aaron behind an overturned water truck, then stood above him, barking until Mason and another soldier, Corporal Danvers, a stocky, bearded man with kind eyes and a broken nose, rushed over. Together, they pulled Aaron further to safety. "He saved me," Aaron croaked, pointing to Max as blood trickled down his temple. The skirmish ended quickly after reinforcements arrived. The attackers retreated, leaving the air acrid with smoke and the bitter smell of burnt stone. Aaron was carried to the mobile field hospital on the base. His injuries were minor, concussion, bruised ribs, but he was benched for the next 2 days. Meanwhile, Mason had taken a hit. A grazing bullet had torn across his left arm. He was lucky, but the sight of blood sent him spiraling. The medics patched him up quickly, but his breathing became erratic, his pupils dilated. The panic attack surged without mercy. Later that night, in the dim, humming quiet of the hospital tent, Mason lay motionless on a cot, his arm bandaged and face pale. The room smelled of antiseptic and sweat. The curtain shifted slightly as Max entered, paused silent on the tarp-covered floor. No one had sent for him, he had simply found his way. Max approached the cot, nudged Mason's good arm with his nose. Mason flinched, then opened his eyes. The sight of Max grounded him instantly. He reached out slowly, fingers threading through the dog's fur. "You found me," he whispered hoarsely. Max lay beside the cot, pressing his body against Mason's side. He didn't move, didn't bark. He simply remained, steady, warm, real. That night, the nightmares didn't come for Mason. For the first time since landing in Syria, he slept through the night. 2 days later, Aaron walked with a limp but insisted on visiting Mason. He found the boy sitting outside the infirmary, Max curled beside him like a watchful shadow. Mason looked up, his face a little older now, eyes clearer. "You all right, kid?" Aaron asked. Mason nodded. "Yeah. Thanks to Max." Aaron knelt down beside Max and rubbed the dog's ear. "You're not just a partner," he muttered. "You're a damn miracle." From then on, the three were inseparable. In the chaos of deployment, they found rhythm in each other. A man broken by war, a boy trying to prove his worth, and a dog who had already lost once and wasn't willing to lose again. The wind over the Syrian mountains carried a sharp, bitter chill, unusual for the desert but fitting for what was to come. Gray clouds rolled low across the horizon, masking the setting sun in a haze of red and violet. At Forward Operating Base Harlow, tension lingered in the air like static. Word had come down, one final sweep, one last operation before rotation. Sergeant Aaron Walker stood quietly at the weapons table, checking the chamber of his rifle. Beside him, Max sat, his coat still dusty from the previous mission, his ears flicking at distant sounds only he could hear. Aaron's expression was unreadable, but something in his posture had changed. His movements were slower, more deliberate. The lines on his face seemed deeper, like someone who had made peace with something unspoken. In his pocket was a sealed envelope, marked with a single word, Emily. Private Mason Rivera adjusted his body armor nearby, trying not to fidget under the weight of anxiety. He'd grown in the past few weeks, less the eager boy and more the wary soldier. His left arm still bore the fresh scar from his last injury, but his movements were confident. His loyalty to Aaron had solidified into something deeper, something akin to reverence. He looked at Max often, as if the dog somehow anchored them both. Captain Elias Monroe gave the final briefing. Insurgent activity confirmed in the ruins west of Ar Ramadi. Intelligence believes they're holding a shipment of detonators. We extract, retrieve, return. Quick and clean. Team Alpha, you're up. The team moved out in silence. The convoy rumbled over rocky roads, the armored vehicle rattling as it passed skeletal buildings and long-abandoned irrigation ditches. Aaron rode with Max at his feet, one hand resting gently on the dog's back. Mason sat across from him, glancing out the narrow window slits, his jaw clenched. At the edge of the target zone, they dismounted. The village was a scar on the earth, walls caved in, doors hanging off rusted hinges. It was too quiet. Max led the way, his nose sweeping low, every muscle alert. They cleared building after building with military precision, Aaron moving in perfect rhythm with Max. But as they neared the last compound, Max halted, growled low, and bristled. It was a trap. An explosion ripped through the far side of the village, then gunfire from the rooftops. The team was pinned instantly. Shouts filled the comms, bullets cracked against stone, and dust filled the sky. Aaron dove for cover, pulling Mason down with him. We're boxed in. Monroe's voice rang out through the radio. Fall back. Fall back. But the exit route was compromised. A second IED had detonated behind them. The only way out was through a collapsed corridor that had to be cleared. Aaron turned to Max, who barked once, understanding. Then he looked to Mason, whose eyes were wide but steady. Get the team out, Aaron ordered. We can't leave you here, Mason replied, shaking his head. I need someone to make it back. That's you. He placed the envelope in Mason's hand, gripped it tight. If I don't, get this to my sister. She'll take care of Max. Mason hesitated only a second, then nodded. With suppressing fire from the remaining soldiers, Aaron advanced toward the barricaded corridor. Max was at his side, weaving through debris like a shadow. He pushed forward, drawing enemy fire, giving the others time to escape. Explosions echoed. The world became smoke, fire, and chaos. Aaron reached the center of the structure and threw a fragmentation grenade into a sniper nest. The moment it detonated, the ceiling above him gave way. The building collapsed. Silence. When the dust cleared, the others had made it to cover, but Aaron was gone. Only Max remained. The dog refused to move. He circled the rubble, nose pressed against the stones, whining, barking, digging with his paws, ignoring the shouts of retreat. When one bloodied hand emerged from beneath the concrete, Max lunged forward and began to claw. Aaron lay crushed beneath twisted beams, his breath shallow, his eyes barely open. Good boy, he whispered. Stay. Then he was still. Max lay beside him, pressing his body close. Even as more shots rang out in the distance, even as debris shifted underfoot, Max did not leave his side. He remained curled next to Aaron, nose resting against his chest, unmoving, as though guarding his final post. It took 3 soldiers and tranquilizers to eventually pull Max away. Back at the base, Mason sat under the buzzing lights of the medical tent. His hands trembled, clutching the now blood-stained envelope. The words on the front blurred through the tears he refused to shed. He had survived. But part of him had not come back. The wind rolled down from the Bitterroot Mountains, cutting across the open fields of western Montana like a blade. Snow clung to the distant treetops, and the sky wore the dull gray of late winter. At the edge of a sleepy town named Meadowridge stood a small wooden house with peeling white paint and a roof patched in 2 different shades of shingle. Smoke curled from the chimney, its scent carrying the weight of wood and solitude. Inside, Dr. Emily Walker stirred a pot of soup without hunger. Emily was in her mid-30s, slim and slightly stooped from long hours hunched over exam tables at her small veterinary clinic. Her hair, a soft chestnut, was tied in a low bun, strands forever escaping to frame her pale, tired face. Her eyes were green but dulled by a grief that hadn't yet settled, the kind of sorrow that wrapped itself in layers of numbness. Since her divorce 6 months ago, she had lived with a quiet determination to protect what little was left, her 9-year-old daughter Sophie and her clinic, which sat at the back of their property in a converted barn. The knock at the door was soft but unmistakable. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened it to find a military courier standing on the porch. A man in his early 50s, with a face weathered by years of protocol and uncomfortable tasks, held out a manila folder and a leather leash. Attached to the leash, standing tall and alert despite the journey, was Max. Max's coat had been brushed, his gear cleaned, but there was something wild in his eyes, something lost. His ears twitched at every sound, his tail hung low, and his gaze never settled on any one thing for long. The courier offered a solemn nod. "Dr. Walker, I'm here on behalf of Sergeant Aaron Walker. Per his final instructions, we're transferring his K-9 partner to your care." Emily's breath caught. "So it's true," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. He saved lives until the end. Including this one." He looked down at Max. "He wouldn't leave the body. We had to sedate him." Emily knelt slowly. Max didn't flinch. He didn't approach, either. He simply watched her with quiet, unreadable eyes. She reached out a hand. He sniffed it once, then looked away. Sophie, hearing voices, came to the doorway in oversized flannel pajamas, her curly blonde hair still mussed from sleep. She was small for her age, with large hazel eyes and a solemn demeanor that had deepened after her father had left and her world had become smaller. "Mom. Who's that?" Emily glanced back. "This is Max. He was your uncle's dog." Sophie stepped forward slowly, curiosity beating out caution. Max remained still, his tail giving a half-hearted flick before stilling again. Emily reached for the leash. The courier saluted. "He's up to date on vaccines. Eats twice a day. Crate trained but prefers the floor. I'll give you a moment." Once the door closed, Emily led Max inside. The warmth of the house made little difference. He padded silently across the hardwood floor, then stopped by the front window and sat. His eyes locked on the road. For the next week, Max barely moved from that spot. He ate mechanically, followed commands only when necessary, and refused to sleep anywhere but the rug beneath the window. Every sound of a car passing sent his ears up, his body alert. Every time, it wasn't Aaron. Emily tried everything, gentle petting, offering treats, even allowing him into the clinic to roam. Nothing softened him. He was a ghost inside the body of a soldier. Sophie, however, was more patient. She began sitting near the window with him, drawing quietly or reading aloud. She'd talk about her school day, how math made her want to cry, how her best friend had moved away, how she sometimes dreamed her dad would come back. Max never responded, but he also never left her side. One afternoon, a winter storm struck hard. Power lines crackled in the distance, and snow fell in thick curtains. The lights flickered, then died. Emily lit candles and stoked the fireplace. She found Sophie curled up beside Max, using his body as a pillow, her fingers wound tightly in his fur. Emily's chest ached with something unnameable. The next morning, Emily found Max in the kitchen, standing still as a statue, staring at the empty hallway where Aaron's voice might have once called out. She approached quietly, crouched down, and said, "He's gone, Max. He's not coming back." Her voice broke, and unexpectedly, Max pressed his head against her shoulder. That was the first time he allowed her touch. A few days later, Sophie brought out one of Aaron's old shirts, an army green t-shirt that still smelled faintly of gun oil and thyme. She laid it beside Max's bed, and he sniffed it, then rested his head on it with a long, low sigh. Emily began seeing changes. Max started following Sophie when she walked to the barn, sometimes even waiting outside her school bus stop. At night, he lay not by the window, but beside her bed. He greeted Emily now, not warmly, but with a quiet nudge. A shift had occurred, small but certain. At the clinic, Max became a silent assistant. He stood by the exam table when Emily treated anxious animals. Once, a skittish retriever tried to bolt during a vaccination, but Max stepped forward, calm and still, and the other dog stilled. Emily looked at him in awe. "You were born for this." Still, Emily hadn't yet opened the envelope Mason had sent with Max. It remained sealed, sitting in a drawer by her bed. Fear, or maybe the weight of memory, had held her back. One evening, after Sophie had gone to sleep and Max was snoring gently by the fireplace, Emily opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Emily. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I don't know what to say, except thank you, for everything. Take care of Max. He's more than a dog. He's family. He'll protect you and Sophie like he protected me. And maybe he'll help you find a way to move forward, too. Tell Sophie her uncle was proud of her. Tell her I wish I could have seen her grow up. Love always. Aaron." Emily read it twice, then a third time. Her tears fell silently, absorbed into the folds of paper. She folded it carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and whispered, "I will. I promise." That night, Max didn't sleep by the window. The chapel sat nestled on the edge of Meadowridge, its white steeple piercing a soft Montana sky streaked with late spring sunlight. The morning was quiet, still, almost sacred. A light breeze stirred the budding branches of sugar maples outside as rows of cars lined the gravel parking lot. Inside, the air was dense with silence and sorrow, broken only by the hushed rustling of black coats and the creak of wooden pews. Emily Walker stood at the front pew, her hands trembling slightly as they held the folded flag she had received earlier that morning. She wore a modest black dress, her chestnut hair pinned into a neat bun. Her green eyes, though dry, were heavy with something deeper than tears. Beside her sat Sophie, wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes, hazel and wide, kept darting toward the back of the chapel, where Max lay still, his head resting between his front paws, his body unusually calm, as if he understood where they were and why. Reverend Charles Whitmore, a slender man in his 60s with a gentle voice and kind blue eyes, stood at the pulpit. He had known Aaron in passing, enough to speak with dignity but not embellishment. "Sergeant Aaron Walker served with honor," he said, his voice echoing beneath the stained-glass windows. "He protected those who could not protect themselves, and he gave everything to the people he loved. Today, we say goodbye not only to a soldier, but to a brother, a friend, a protector." The casket, a dark mahogany resting on a dais beneath the arched window, bore a folded flag and a single photograph, Aaron in uniform, Max seated beside him. The photo had been taken during their last week together at Fort Liberty. Aaron had been smiling, one of the few captured moments where the weight of war had lifted. As the service reached its closing moments, the pallbearers stood in place. Emily clutched Sophie's hand, preparing for the final farewell. But before anyone moved, Max did. He rose slowly, his body stiff but deliberate. The congregation turned as his nails clicked softly against the wooden floor. Emily whispered his name under her breath, but Max didn't stop. He moved past the pews, past the startled glances and hushed murmurs, his gaze locked on the casket. Then he did what no one expected. With a sudden, determined leap, Max vaulted onto the low platform and gently curled his body across the top of the casket. His head rested above Aaron's chest, as if listening for a heartbeat that would never return. The entire chapel gasped. A woman somewhere in the back sobbed quietly. Even Reverend Whitmore paused, his hands frozen mid-gesture. Max made no sound. He didn't cry, didn't whimper. He simply lay there, his eyes half closed, as though guarding his partner one final time. Emily's breath hitched. She stood, reaching out instinctively, but stopped herself. Sophie, already holding her phone, raised it in trembling hands and pressed record. Her childlike fingers gripped the device, but her gaze was mature beyond her years. Max remained on the casket for nearly a full minute. In that moment, time halted. Every soul in that chapel seemed to understand something wordless: loyalty beyond death, grief without boundaries, love unspoken but absolute. Eventually, Max stirred. He lifted his head slightly, looked toward Emily, then stepped down with a grace that belied his size. He padded back to Sophie's side and sat, his tail curling around her feet. Sophie gently touched his ear. Later that evening, at home, Sophie uploaded the video to her small social media account with the caption, "My uncle's dog said goodbye today. He didn't want to leave him behind." The clip was short. 37 seconds. But it spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. By the end of the week, major news outlets had picked it up. The hashtags #MaxTheSoldierDog and #LoyalToTheEnd trended globally. Comment sections filled with condolences, shared stories, and prayers. Veterans wrote messages honoring Max. Gold Star families reached out with words of recognition. People from every corner of the world were moved. Emily was hesitant at first. Privacy had always been her armor, but she couldn't deny what was happening. Max, without trying, had become a symbol of everything Aaron stood for. She gave one local interview, then another. Sophie sat beside her, answering questions in her quiet, thoughtful voice. "Why do you think Max did it?" one reporter asked. Sophie thought for a long moment. Because he didn't know Aaron was gone. He was still waiting for the next command. Emily's eyes filled with tears. As the attention grew, so did the letters. Boxes arrived daily, gifts for Max, hand-drawn cards from children, medals, even a custom portrait of Aaron and Max from a veteran's widow in Kentucky. The porch was stacked with kindness. But Max didn't change. He still slept near Sophie's bed, still stood watch by the back door in the early mornings, still followed Emily around the clinic in silent loyalty. One evening, as the sky flamed orange behind the barn, Emily sat with Max on the porch swing. She had one arm around Sophie, the other resting lightly on Max's back. "I think you did more than protect Aaron," she said softly. "You gave us something to hold on to." Max looked up, then leaned into her touch. The morning sun in Meadowridge warmed the frost-kissed grass as light filtered through the tall classroom windows of Pine Creek Elementary. The school sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, its old brick exterior softened by years of laughter and scraped knees. Inside, the walls were plastered with colorful posters of vowels, math problems, and cartoon animals in graduation caps. A banner near the front door read, "Every voice matters." Max walked beside Emily with steady poise, his black and tan coat glinting under the fluorescent lights. He wore a green therapy dog vest stitched with his name, his ID, and a patch that read in honor of Sergeant A. Walker. It had taken months of training and assessment, but Max had passed every test. Emily, guiding him with a gentle hand, wore her vet coat today not as a doctor, but as an educator. Her face had grown brighter in recent weeks, the cloud of grief not gone but no longer suffocating. Sophie walked beside them, clutching a folder of hand-drawn cards that she and her classmates had made to thank Max. They were greeted at the entrance by Principal Marianne Kepler, a woman in her late 50s with shoulder-length silver hair, a navy blazer with gold buttons, and a warm, practiced smile. "Dr. Walker, thank you again for coming. The kids are excited, and some are nervous. Especially one in particular." Emily nodded. "We're honored to be here. Max has changed all of us." Marianne guided them down the hallway. "There's one student I'd love for Max to meet in particular. His name is Charlie Moore. He's in the 4th grade. Bright boy, very imaginative, but he struggles with a stutter. It's severe. Social situations, especially reading aloud, make it worse. In classroom 4B, children sat in a semicircle on a blue rug, eyes wide as Max entered. He moved calmly, eyes scanning the room, then sat near the center, tail tucked neatly around his paws. Emily introduced him gently. This is Max. He was a soldier's dog. Now, he helps people feel strong again. Tiny hands shot up. Did he ever fight bad guys? One boy asked. Can I pet him? Squealed a girl with glasses. Emily smiled. Yes, and yes, but only when he sits like this. That means he's ready. While the children took turns meeting Max, Emily's eyes found a boy sitting apart from the group. Charlie Moore had dark curly hair that half covered his eyes and wore a hoodie pulled low despite the warmth of the room. His hands fidgeted with a pencil, tapping it rhythmically against his knee. Marianne whispered, "That's him. He doesn't speak unless absolutely necessary." Emily nodded, then gave Max a soft cue. "Max, go say hi." Max walked slowly toward Charlie. The boy froze. Emily waited, saying nothing. Max stopped in front of him, sat, and gently placed a paw on Charlie's foot. The pencil tapping stopped. Charlie stared down, then slowly raised a hand and touched Max's head. Emily walked over, crouching nearby. "Would you like to tell him your name?" she asked softly. Charlie hesitated, eyes darting toward the circle of children. Then, just loud enough for Max to hear, he whispered, "CHCH Charlie." Max gave a quiet whine, nuzzling closer. Charlie blinked, surprised. Emily smiled but didn't push. Instead, she handed him a card. "Would you like to help us read to Max next time? He's a very good listener." Charlie didn't answer, but he nodded. Slightly. That night, Sophie asked over dinner, "Do you think Max understands when people are scared?" Emily looked across the table at Max, who was lying beneath the window as always, eyes half closed, ears relaxed. "I think he doesn't care if you're scared. He just stays until you're not." In the following weeks, Max returned to Pine Creek every Thursday. The children came to love Max Day. They read stories aloud, shared secrets, and even practiced breathing exercises with him. But none changed more than Charlie. By the 3rd visit, Charlie greeted Max at the door. By the 4th, he spoke a full sentence in class. And by the 6th, he stood before his classmates and read a short paragraph about animals, his voice trembling, halting, but completing every word. When he finished, Max barked once, wagging his tail. The class cheered. Charlie beamed. Outside the school, Emily was met by Ms. Teresa Danvers, a local counselor and Vietnam War widow in her 70s. She was petite and wiry, with thick glasses, short curly hair, and a handshake like a firm truth. "I heard about what your dog did for that boy," Teresa said. "I run a support group for veterans, some of them struggle to even show up. I don't know if a dog can fix that, but maybe Max could make it easier to try." And so, a new chapter began. Emily, with Max at her side, began visiting the local Veterans Center every other week. The first session was quiet. A few skeptical men sat in folding chairs, arms crossed. But Max simply walked among them, sat at their feet, and stayed. A grizzled Marine named Hank, missing 2 fingers and his sense of humor, was the first to kneel and say, "He reminds me of my old K9. Dusty." By the 3rd session, more veterans arrived. Max's presence filled the room with something steady and strong. Words came easier. Memories less painful. He became a bridge, between children and war-torn soldiers, between silence and healing. One day, Charlie's mother stopped Emily in the school parking lot. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s with deep lines around her mouth and hope flickering in her voice. "I don't know what you did," she said, but I haven't seen my son smile like this since his father passed away 2 years ago. Thank you for bringing Max. Emily nodded, blinking back emotion. He's the one who did the healing. We just followed. That night, in the soft glow of their living room, Sophie curled beside Max, whispering stories to him. Emily sat with a photo of Aaron in her hands, her thumb brushing the frame's edge. You're still saving people, Aaron, she said aloud. You just sent Max to keep doing it for you. Max, though resting, raised his head slightly, then let out a low, content breath and returned to sleep. The first snow of winter arrived softly, blanketing Meadowridge in a quilt of white that glowed beneath the silver light of a waxing moon. In the quiet home just past the pine grove on Maple Hollow Road, Emily Walker sat at the edge of her bed, a steaming mug of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. Her hair was loose for once, curling softly at her shoulders, and she wore a worn navy sweater with sleeves pushed to her elbows. Beside her, on the nightstand, sat a thick leather-bound journal, its pages half filled with quiet truths, memories, and chapters of something larger than grief. On the spine was a handwritten title in fading gold ink, The Shadow Beside Me. Max lay curled near the foot of the bed, one paw twitching as he dreamed. His breathing was steady but not deep, his ears flicked with each distant sound as if his subconscious were still on duty. Emily watched him, as she often did at night, wondering what the mind of a soldier dog held in its sleep. He let out a soft growl, then a whimper. Then his body stiffened. Max's eyes flew open. He bolted upright, ears high, body alert. For a moment, he stared into the far corner of the room, toward the hallway that led to the front of the house. His gaze didn't waver. Then he barked, sharp and singular, not in fear but in declaration. Emily startled, nearly spilling her tea. Max, she whispered. He leapt down from the bed and trotted to the hallway, pausing near the arch that separated the den from the foyer. He stared at the space near the front door, silent, still. The flicker of the porch light cast elongated shadows across the wood floor. Max tilted his head, then barked again, this time softer, lower, like a call and response. Emily stood slowly, her breath shallow. What is it, boy? She asked, walking over. Max didn't look back. His tail was still, but his body was relaxed now. He sat down, ears twitching slightly, eyes still fixed on the empty air. It was as if he was listening. Waiting. Sophie, sleepy-eyed and bundled in a blanket, appeared behind them. Is someone there? She asked in a small voice. No, Emily replied gently. But maybe, something is. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was reverent. The next morning, Emily sat by the fireplace with her journal open. Max rested at her feet, head on his paws. Outside, the snow glittered like a sea of crushed diamonds. Sophie was upstairs, working on a school project. Emily picked up her pen and began to write. There are things we can't explain. Things that whisper to us between dreams and daylight. Last night, Max heard something I couldn't. Or maybe he heard someone. I like to think it was Aaron, coming to check in. I like to believe he still watches over us. That his love never left, only shifted shape. That evening, she sat at her writing desk and reread the last few entries. She had been slowly compiling stories, memories, and reflections, not just of Aaron, but of Max's journey since. She hadn't planned on turning it into a book, not at first. But the story had taken on a life of its own. She titled it The Shadow Beside Me. The phrase had come to her one afternoon while watching Max follow Sophie across the backyard, never more than a few paces behind. He was always there, quiet, loyal, strong. Just like Aaron had been. Emily shared a draft of the introduction with her friend and editor, Natalie Reed, a warm and insightful woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, big glasses, and a laugh that could light up a room. Natalie had helped Emily publish a few veterinary columns years ago, and they'd stayed in touch ever since. Natalie called that night, her voice cracking slightly. "Emily, I don't say this often, but your story, it's not just beautiful. It's necessary. People need to feel this kind of hope." Emily smiled softly. "It's not just mine. It's Aaron's. And Max's. And maybe, it's everyone's who's ever lost something and needed a reason to keep going." Meanwhile, Max began spending more time near Aaron's old army duffel bag, which Emily had stored near the fireplace. One day, Sophie found him lying beside it with his head resting on the faded patch that bore Aaron's name. "Do you think he dreams about Uncle Aaron?" she asked. Emily knelt beside her. "Maybe. Or maybe it's not a dream. Maybe he still hears him sometimes." In the weeks that followed, Max grew more affectionate, not in a needy way, but in small gestures, nudging Sophie's hand during her homework, placing his head on Emily's lap during her writing sessions, waiting at the door when the mailman came as if expecting someone else. Then came a Sunday unlike the rest. They had been invited to speak at a small memorial service at a local church, dedicated to honoring fallen veterans and their families. Emily, hesitant at first, agreed to read an excerpt from her book. Max would accompany her. The church was small, with wooden beams across the ceiling and old stained glass windows that poured soft light onto the pews. A modest crowd had gathered, veterans, families, schoolchildren. Sophie sat in the front row, clutching a copy of the manuscript. Emily approached the podium, her heart pounding, Max sitting at her side. "I'd like to read a short passage from The Shadow Beside Me," she began. As she spoke, Max turned his head slowly toward the back of the chapel. His ears rose. His body stiffened, not in fear, but in focus. Then he stood up and walked quietly to the center aisle. He stopped, stared at a patch of empty floor halfway between the pews. And he wagged his tail. No sound. No movement. Just the weight of something unseen, something sacred. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Sophie gasped quietly. Max sat down, never breaking eye contact with the empty space. Emily smiled through tears. She closed the book. "Sometimes love doesn't end," she said softly. "Sometimes it stays beside us, unseen but never unfelt. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it visits." Max stood, turned, and walked back to Emily, resting his head gently against her leg. The sun rose gently over Washington, D.C., casting a golden hue across the manicured lawns and marble steps of the Pentagon. Flags swayed in the breeze with a slow dignity. Inside the Hall of Honor, the polished floor gleamed beneath ornate lighting, and rows of black chairs were lined with veterans, military officials, and a few invited families. Cameras flashed in the back, but the room itself was quiet, almost reverent. Max sat near the podium, wearing his green vest, freshly cleaned, and adorned with a new patch: service, sacrifice, loyalty. His ears were alert, but his body was still, calm, as though he knew this was a moment that wasn't just about him, but about everything he had carried, and everyone he had carried it for. To Max's left stood Sophie Walker, now 10 years old, in a pressed navy blue dress with a golden pin in the shape of a paw on her lapel. Her honey-blonde curls were neatly tied with a ribbon, and she held a small stack of note cards in both hands, knuckles white with nervousness. Her mother, Emily, stood just behind her in a charcoal dress and heels she didn't enjoy wearing but wore anyway for Aaron. A uniformed officer stepped forward, tall and commanding, with silver hair, a clean jawline, and deep-set eyes that had seen decades of history. General Raymond Holloway was a decorated four-star with a reputation for compassion and conviction. His voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. "Today," he said, "we honor not just soldiers who wear the uniform, but those who serve without a voice, who act not from orders, but from something deeper. Today, we recognize Max, military K-9, partner to the late Sergeant Aaron Walker. For bravery under fire, loyalty in battle, and devotion in grief, Max is awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, rarely given, but wholly earned." The room erupted in applause. Max didn't flinch. He looked up at Sophie, then Emily, then sat proudly as the medal was gently fastened to his vest. General Holloway stepped aside, and a staff member approached Sophie. She took a shaky breath, stepped forward, and began to speak. "My name is Sophie Walker," she said, her voice small but clear. "Max was my uncle's dog, but to me, he became a best friend, and a hero." She paused, glancing at Max. He watched her patiently. "When my uncle didn't come back, Max didn't just help us remember him. He helped us keep going. He helped a boy who couldn't speak find his voice. He helped veterans remember that love doesn't end at the battlefield. And he helped me find something I didn't know I had, a dream." Her fingers trembled slightly. "I want to be a veterinarian, like my mom. Because I want to help animals the way Max helped people. I want to spend my life giving back to creatures who give us everything without asking." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Sophie finished softly. "Max taught me that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes, they walk on 4 legs, and they follow you into your darkest days, just to make sure you're never alone." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Max simply wagged his tail. Back in Meadowridge, life slowed again, but not in the way it had before. It wasn't steeped in grief anymore. The grief had settled into something more solid, more useful. It had become legacy. Max no longer worked as a therapy dog. He had earned his rest. But every day, he still waited outside Sophie's bedroom as she dressed for school. He still followed Emily into the clinic, not as an assistant, but as company. And at night, he still curled beside the fireplace, resting his chin on the edge of Aaron's old army duffel bag. Emily's book The Shadow Beside Me was published in the spring and quickly climbed to the top of several national lists. Not because it was marketed heavily, but because readers passed it to others, veterans to their families, teachers to students, widows to strangers, until the story became something more than pages. The final chapter of the book read: "He was born to serve, but he lived to love." Max was more than a soldier's dog. He was a living reminder that loyalty has no language, and grief has no end, but neither does love. He was not just a dog. He was a miracle with a heartbeat. Emily often did book readings at schools and libraries, sometimes with Sophie at her side, sometimes with Max resting near her feet. One day, during a Q&A at a veterans hall, a young woman raised her hand. "Do you ever think Max knows what he means to people?" she asked. Emily smiled, glanced at Max, older now, a little slower, his muzzle graying, but still watching her like the first day he'd arrived. "I think," she said, "he always knew. But he didn't need to. He didn't do it to be remembered. He did it because it was who he was." That night, the 3 of them, Emily, Sophie, and Max, sat on the back porch watching the fireflies flicker over the field. The stars blinked overhead, the air carried the hum of life. Sophie leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Do you think Uncle Aaron would be proud of me?" Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head. "He already is." Max sighed contentedly and rested his head across Sophie's feet. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt whole. In the story of Max, we witness more than a dog's loyalty, we see the echo of divine love. Max did not speak, yet he taught us the language of unwavering devotion. He did not pray, but he lived out a prayer with every step beside the ones he loved. Through war, through loss, and through healing, Max remained, a quiet miracle sent to remind us that love does not end when breath does. It continues, in memory, in legacy, and in moments that feel like heaven is just a little closer. Sometimes, God does not send angels with wings, He sends them with paws and silent eyes that understand our brokenness. Max was not just a dog. He was a vessel of comfort, of strength, and of faith. In a world that often forgets the sacred in the simple, Max brought it back to life. And perhaps that is the lesson for all of us, that love, when given fully, becomes eternal. That God still works through the quiet companions at our feet. That healing is slow, but never impossible, and never alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to honor Max and the heroes like him. Subscribe for more stories that remind us love is still alive in this world. And if you believe that God's love is greater than any loss, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and keep you always.
The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't even flinch when she stepped closer. Just stared, those unblinking amber eyes locked on something far beyond the clearing. Like he'd been watching it for days, maybe weeks. Claire almost didn't see him at first. The chain blended into the bark, rusted where it coiled around the base of the tree. But then there was the smell, wet fur, dried blood, and something else. Something sour, like silence rotting in the heat. She crouched slowly, unsure why her heart was hammering like this. She'd seen worse. As a paramedic, she'd seen worse every week. But something about this moment, this dog, it made the forest feel wrong. Like the trees were watching too. He was a German shepherd, but barely recognizable. Patches of fur were missing, ribs sharp against his skin. But it wasn't the injuries that rattled her. It was his stillness. Like he'd already left his body, but his eyes hadn't gotten the message. She reached for her bag, pulling out the protein bar she hadn't eaten on shift, peeled it slowly, extended it gently. The dog didn't move, didn't sniff, just stared at something behind her. She turned instinctively, expecting to see a person. There was nothing. Back turned, she felt it. The shift in the air. A breath that wasn't hers. The sound of a branch snapping. Not loudly, but deliberate. She spun fast. Still nothing. But the dog, he blinked for the first time. Slowly. Once. As if to say, now you've heard it too. Claire's radio buzzed, making her jump. Static. Then the dispatcher's voice. Routine. A car accident downtown. But she didn't answer. She couldn't look away from the dog. Or the chain. Or the thick leather collar rubbed raw into his neck. She took a cautious step forward. That's when she saw it. A torn piece of cloth beneath his front paw. Faded red. Smeared with something darker. She gently slid it out. It was a child's bandana. Torn at the edge. Frayed like it had been clutched, not worn. The dog's eyes didn't follow her hand. They stayed fixed on the same point in the woods. His body trembled once, not from fear, but from something deeper. Memory, loyalty, guilt. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She was trained to assess, to triage, to move fast. But this moment asked her to slow down, to listen. And listening, she realized, meant more than her ears. She scanned the trees again. Why here? Who would chain a dog to this exact tree? Miles from the nearest road. And why wasn't he barking for help? She whispered gently, voice cracking. You're waiting, aren't you? The dog blinked again, and again stared past her. She knelt beside him, hand hovering near the chain's lock. It was new, shiny, modern, out of place against the weathered bark and torn roots. Someone wanted him found, but not too soon. Her skin prickled. Someone had been here recently, and someone was watching to see who came. A sharp whistle echoed through the trees. Claire froze. The dog flinched. His first movement. She stood up slowly, every instinct screaming to leave. But her eyes scanned the underbrush. Then she saw it, half buried in the dirt near the tree trunk. Something metallic. She dug it out with shaking fingers. Keychain. Shaped like a soccer ball. Faded. Scratched. She knew it instantly. Her brother's. Claire's knees buckled. That was 2 years ago. They never found his body. Only his bike. Tossed in the river like a lie. The dog's eyes finally left the forest. They turned to her. And for the first time, they said something. Don't leave. Claire didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, those amber ones stared back. Silent, pleading, hollowed out by something too big to name. Morning came slow. Her headlights cut through the mist as she drove the winding path back to the forest. And the whole way, her fingers gripped the cracked soccer ball keychain like it was still warm from her brother's hand. The German shepherd was still there, still chained. still silent. But his head rose when he saw her. Not alert, not fearful. Expecting. She set down a bowl of warm broth this time. He sniffed it, didn't touch it. His eyes drifted to the treeline again. Like he was keeping watch. Like something was supposed to emerge. And hadn't. She crouched beside him. Spoke low. Calm. I know you're waiting for someone. But I need to know why you have this. She held out the keychain again. Nothing. Then, a crunch of gravel. Tires. Claire turned sharply. Relief first, maybe animal control finally. Then unease. It was a forest ranger's truck, but the logo was faded, off-center. And the man who stepped out wasn't familiar. She knew most of the rangers around here. Tight-knit team. This one looked too clean. New boots. No dirt under the nails. Eyes too focused on her, not the dog. Lost? He asked casually, glancing past her toward the chain. His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Claire straightened. Just checking on a dog someone left chained out here. Called it in yesterday. No one came. The man nodded slowly, hands in pockets. Sorry about that. Dispatch can be scattered. I'll take him from here. Claire didn't move. You got ID? The man chuckled, took a step forward. The dog's ears twitched. Claire noticed the badge then, slightly tilted. Wrong font, and his nameplate was blank. She stepped in front of the dog, planting herself. I'll wait here with you. Just want to make sure he's safe. The man's smile tightened. For a long second, nothing but the wind moved. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked back to his truck. She watched until the tail lights disappeared. Her hands were shaking. The dog hadn't moved, but his breathing had changed. Shallow, pacing inside his chest. She sat beside him, unsure what terrified her more. That the man wasn't a ranger, or that he was, once. The sun broke through clouds overhead. For a second, everything looked normal, peaceful. But then she saw it, just behind the trunk, half buried in the soil. A rectangle, black, cracked. A phone. She pulled it out, heart lurching. Mud covered. Screen smashed. But she pressed the power button. Nothing. She opened the back panel. The SIM card was gone. But the wallpaper. The lock screen lit up for one brief second before dying. Her brother. Smiling, hair-soaked, holding that same keychain. The last photo she'd ever taken of him. She staggered back, dropping the phone. The dog made a low, almost inaudible whimper. How long have you been here? Her voice broke mid-sentence. The dog looked at her then, really looked, and there was something human in that stare, recognition. She dialed 911, hands shaking, but the signal dropped. No bars, no satellite, just static. The forest swallowed sound whole. She paced, tried again, nothing. Then she noticed the chain wasn't locked the way she thought. It wasn't wrapped around the tree. It was bolted into the ground. Concrete poured into a pit, disguised with dirt and roots. Someone meant for him to stay. Not a random cruelty. Prison. She heard the whistle again. Not a bird. Command. Short, sharp, deliberate. The dog lunged against the chain, snarling now. First sound he'd made. Claire turned, adrenaline surging. She scanned the treeline. A figure ducked behind the brush. She grabbed a branch, hand wrapped tight. Who's there? Silence. Only the dog growling now like something ancient had snapped. She stepped toward the brush, heart hammering. The trees said nothing. Then the dog stopped. His head turned sharply to the left. Claire followed his gaze. Fresh footprints in the mud. Deep, heavy, too large for a child. She knelt beside them, still warm. Claire's breath clouded in the morning chill as she followed the tracks, each step pulling her deeper into a silence that felt carved, not natural. The trees here grew close together, unnaturally so, like ribs caging something in. The footprints led straight into that darkness, big, deliberate, fresh. Someone had been there less than an hour ago. The dog let out a strained whimper behind her, tugging weakly against the chain. His eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were warning. She hesitated, then broke a branch from a low limb. Not much of a weapon, but it felt better than nothing. Her boots pressed into the prints, trying not to erase them, but they were wide, uneven, like the person had been carrying something, or dragging it. 40 feet in, the trees opened to a shallow ditch. There, half buried in leaves, was a stun gun, bent, cracked, but unmistakable. She crouched, gloved hand brushing over its surface. No dust, no rust. Whoever had it dropped it. Recently, she heard a twig snap behind her. Spun. Nothing. But her skin pulled tight, goosebumps rising. She wasn't alone. Not in this forest. Not in this story. She backed toward the dog. He was still staring in the same direction, chest rising faster now, like he knew what she'd touched. She looked back at the stun gun, then at the treeline. Was this what had been used on him, or someone else? Claire stood in the clearing again and scanned the area with sharper eyes. This wasn't random. The location, the concealment, the chain bolted into concrete. It wasn't just about abandoning a dog. It was about placing him. She called animal control again. No answer. Left a message. Again. Then her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Stop coming back here. Her heart stopped. She scanned the woods. Who has this number? No response. She shoved the phone in her pocket and turned back to the tree. She had to free him. Now. She pried at the bolts, fingers trembling. Too deep. Cemented in. She needed tools. She needed backup. But something else caught her eye. A faded patch of plastic tucked under a nearby log. She pulled it out, an evidence marker. Number 7. Like the ones investigators use. But this forest was never officially part of the search for her brother. Her chest ached. 2 years ago, an anonymous tip rerouted the search party to the river. She now saw the lie. They'd been sent away from this area deliberately. Her stomach churned. The dog let out a sudden bark. Loud, urgent, desperate. She turned. Another car was parked just up the hill, half hidden behind brush. Not hers. She crouched low, watching. The driver was still inside. No movement. She crept closer, heartbeat in her throat. Inside, the silhouette of a man, unmoving, eyes staring straight ahead. He was watching the clearing. Watching them. She snapped a photo of the plate. Sent it to a friend on the force. No message. Just the photo. Then the car started. Backed up. Tires spinning on loose gravel. It vanished down the hill. She ran back to the dog. The wind was picking up now, urgent, like it was pushing her away. She felt her control unraveling. The moment was spiraling. Then she saw her Jeep. Tires slashed. All four. She dropped to her knees beside it, mind racing. No signal. No way out. And somewhere in these woods, whoever chained that dog was circling. Watching. The sun was starting to drop behind the trees. Shadows lengthened. She looked at the dog again. He was lying down now, eyes open, tracking her every move. Not pleading anymore. Waiting. Trusting her. She slid down beside him, back against the same tree. Rested her hand on his paw. You were never just left here. You were put here. As a message. As a marker. Or maybe, as a witness. He blinked slowly. Her phone buzzed again. One new image. No text. Just a photo of her standing next to the dog. Taken from behind a tree. She hadn't seen the flash. She hadn't heard the click. The forest had. The cold bit harder that night. Claire built a fire low and tight near the base of the tree, shielding it with her jacket. The German shepherd didn't move toward the warmth. He lay curled tight, eyes open, watching the woods like something might come out and try to take her. Again, she didn't sleep, just sat there, legs numb, ears tuned to every crack, every rustle. She kept replaying that photo, her back turned, her body next to the chained dog, framed like prey. By sunrise, her hands were blistered from trying to chip away at the concrete around the chain bolt. Useless. But she didn't stop. She talked to the dog between strikes, half to keep herself sane, half because she felt like he was the only one listening. I used to have a dog when I was little. She would only bark at the people who lied. The shepherd tilted his head slightly. Just once. Like he understood. Claire paused. A thought broke through the fog in her brain. She stood slowly, walked a few paces away, and gave a soft command. Sit. The dog didn't move. She took another step, voice firmer. Heel. The dog's ears twitched. She circled around. Stay. No movement. But his eyes followed. She walked back, heart pounding. Then softly down. This time he responded. Laid his head flat against the dirt. Her pulse spiked. This wasn't some random stray. He was trained. Not just obedience, but tactical. Military style. Whoever had him wasn't just cruel. They were trained too. She searched under his collar again. This time deeper. Found something hard, wedged under the leather. She pried it out carefully. A microchip tag snapped in half. Useless. Untraceable. But someone had gone through the trouble of erasing him. She stepped away, scanning again. The forest gave nothing back. Not yet. Around noon, the dog stood on his own. Limped 3 feet in a single direction, then stopped. Stared at a patch of overgrown weeds. Claire followed his gaze, digging her hands into the dirt. Within seconds, she hit plastic. Then nylon. A torn backpack. Child size. Zippers rusted shut. She forced it open. Inside a rope. Gloves. A granola wrapper expired over a year ago. And a child's sneaker. Faded blue. Caked with dried blood. She dropped it like it burned. Tears blurred her vision. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. So clear it sounded like he was still beside her. Race you to the clearing, slowpoke. She wiped her face, trying to anchor herself. The dog nudged the bag gently with his nose. Then sat beside it. Not barking. Not whimpering. Testifying. Claire grabbed her phone. Still no signal. Still stranded. But now no longer unsure. Whoever this dog belonged to, whoever had him trained, collared, erased, had a reason to bury this backpack. And that reason bled straight into her past. A low hum filled the air. Not from the woods. From under them. She stepped closer to the ground. The hum was mechanical. Rhythmic. She tapped the earth. Hollow. A structure. Buried. She sprinted back to her jeep. Rummaged through the emergency kit. Found the folding shovel. The bolts she couldn't break. But the ground she could. She dug for hours, blistered fingers bleeding, until steel scraped stone. A hatch. Locked tight with a heavy padlock. Scratched. Used before. She stared at it, heart in her throat. The dog stood behind her now, silent. She tried prying the lock. Nothing. Then the forest cracked again. A new sound. Not twigs. Not birds. Footsteps. Human. Slow. Purposeful. She snapped her head toward the trees. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, face hidden under a hat. Hands empty. But his stance was wrong. Too relaxed. Too steady. She stepped in front of the dog. Instinct. The man said nothing. Just stared. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't look away. Then the man turned. Melted back into the trees. She finally glanced down at her phone. One message. You're digging in the wrong place. The dog sat down beside her. No bark. No growl. Only his eyes. And they were terrified. Claire drove like her bones were on fire. The nearest gas station was 15 miles out, and every turn on the winding road felt like it was being watched. The dog lay silent in the back seat, head low, eyes alert, as if he knew this wasn't escape. It was a chase in slow motion. The second she pulled in, she ran to the payphone inside. No signal still. Everything in her town was down, or shut off, or silenced. She dialed directly to dispatch. Gave the badge number she'd copied from the man in the woods. Gave the license plate. Gave her name. The voice on the other end paused too long. Ma'am, that vehicle was decommissioned 3 years ago. That ranger is deceased. Claire's blood went cold. She hung up without saying goodbye. The clerk behind the counter was watching her. Too long. Too still. She left fast. Back on the road, she turned toward the sheriff's office. They'd written off her brother as an accident. A runaway. And maybe they'd believed that. But not anymore. She stormed in, dragging the dog behind her. He didn't resist. Sheriff Wallace looked up from his desk like she was a stranger. "We need to talk." He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "You remember this dog?" He looked, frowned, shook his head. "Should I?" "He's trained. Military trained. Someone left him chained to a tree, bolted to a slab of concrete, 2 miles from where my brother disappeared. I found my brother's keychain buried beneath him." The sheriff's face didn't flinch. Claire dropped the cracked phone on his desk. Her brother's lock screen photo still faintly visible beneath the broken glass. Wallace sighed, picked it up. "You've been chasing ghosts for a long time, Claire. Then explain this." She threw the torn backpack on his desk. The child's shoe fell out. The blood was unmistakable. Wallace stared at it. Then he closed the door. "I'm going to ask you one time. Where did you get this?" "You already know." His hand went to his belt. "Not his gun. His radio." She stepped back. "I already called in the license plate, Sheriff. Dispatch told me he was dead. So who the hell is pretending to be him?" Wallace paused. "You don't understand what you're stepping into. Then tell me." He didn't. He turned, picked up the phone. Claire grabbed the stun gun from her bag and slammed it on the table. This was found 30 feet from the dog. He didn't speak. She moved closer. "You're not going to bury this too." The sheriff finally looked up, and for a split second she saw fear. Not of her, of something else. He stood. "Hands up. Get out of here. Take that dog and forget this road ever led you there." He opened the drawer slowly, revealing an envelope, tossed it on the table. Inside were photos, dozens, of cages, faces, kids. Claire's hand shook as she lifted one. "That's how they trained the dogs." She stared. "You knew." He nodded once. Silent. She grabbed the envelope, left without another word. Back in the Jeep, she stared at the dog in the rearview mirror. He was shaking, not from fear, from recognition. He knew what was coming. She didn't go home. She drove back into the woods, took the long road, tires crunching over dried leaves. And then he jumped. Not violently, urgently. The dog slammed his paw against the passenger window, then looked left. Claire hit the brakes. There, just off the road. A narrow path, almost invisible. He whimpered once. Loud, clear. She turned in. The trees closed in again. But the air changed. It wasn't just woods now. It smelled like metal, rust, oil. Then she saw it. A rundown shed, overgrown, collapsing in on itself. But the dog barked once, then again. Claire parked, stepped out slowly. The dog ran forward, limping still but fast. Determined. She followed. The shed door was rotted. She pushed it open. Darkness inside. The dog stood at the entrance. Didn't go in. Claire stepped inside. The floor creaked. She turned on her flashlight and froze. On the far wall, chains. Dozens. Collars. Leashes. Photos pinned around them. Names scribbled in fading ink. And a cage. Still closed. Still locked. She walked toward it. Inside, a boy, curled into himself. Breathing. Alive. He looked up. And behind him, in the shadows, her brother's jacket, hung neatly on a nail. The flashlight flickered. The dog growled once behind her. And from the darkness, a voice whispered her name. Claire didn't move. The flashlight trembled in her hand, casting wild shadows across the rusted walls. The voice came again, soft, unrecognizable, yet spoken with the confidence of someone who knew her, intimately, like they'd been watching for a long time. The boy inside the cage didn't speak. He didn't even flinch. His eyes were wide and hollow, as if they'd forgotten how to process rescue. Claire dropped to her knees, trying the lock. It wouldn't budge. The metal was old but reinforced. She pulled a small crowbar from her bag and wedged it under the latch, heart pounding. The German shepherd stood stiff at the door, head low, hackles raised, a low rumble rising in his throat. He wasn't afraid. He was bracing. The lock cracked with a shriek of metal. The boy recoiled at the sound, instinct before recognition. Claire reached in slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. You're safe now." He shook his head once, then pointed. Behind her, Claire turned, and there he was, the fake ranger. No badge, no mask now, just a calm, almost tired expression. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need one. Not with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with too much for too long. I told you to stop digging. Claire stood between him and the boy. You left that dog to die. He nodded slowly, because he remembered too much. She stepped forward. That's the mistake, isn't it? You thought no one would come for him. He smiled faintly. He wasn't supposed to bond with anyone. Claire clenched the crowbar tighter. You trained him to hurt people. No, he trained himself to protect them. That was the problem. The dog stepped forward now, low growl turning into a snarl. The man didn't back up. He looked down at the shepherd with something like regret. He wasn't supposed to remember that boy, but he did. The boy in the cage whimpered. Claire turned, just long enough to see him crawl out, barefoot, limbs shaking. She gestured him behind her, shielding him with her body. The man moved fast, but the dog moved faster. He lunged, body a blur of fury and purpose. Years of pain exploded in that moment. He didn't bark. He didn't hesitate. He hit the man in the chest, knocking him flat, jaws locked on the arm raised to defend. Claire grabbed the boy and ran. Out the shed, down the slope, toward the jeep. A single gunshot cracked behind her. She turned, heart shattering. The dog staggered out of the shed, chest heaving, one leg dragging. He was still alive. Claire met him halfway, cradled his head in her arms. Blood soaked into her jacket, but his eyes never left her face. You came back. His tail moved once. Sirens echoed in the distance. Finally, real ones. She looked down the road. Police vehicles, flashing lights, a team moving in with weapons drawn. Claire stood, the boy clinging to her side. The dog collapsed but didn't close his eyes. Not yet. Hours later, the scene was sealed. The shed was declared part of a trafficking ring. Children, dogs, evidence buried and forgotten. But not by everyone. Claire sat on the back of an ambulance, the dog beside her, wrapped in blankets. The boy, his name was Eli, slept inside another unit, safe. For the first time in a long time, the sheriff never showed up. He'd resigned quietly that morning. No words, no explanation. Claire looked down at the German shepherd resting beside her. You led me to him, to all of them. His eyes met hers. Peaceful now. She reached out, rested her hand on his paw. I don't know how to thank you. He blinked once. Then, for the first time, closed his eyes without fear. 2 weeks later, Claire brought him home. His wounds healing. His coat growing back in patches. But it was the eyes that changed the most. Softer, lighter, no longer watching for ghosts. He had a new name now. Justice. He answered to it every time. Sometimes, she still caught him staring out the window at night. Not afraid, not haunted, just remembering. Because he knew something the world tried to forget. The truth never stays buried. And loyalty never dies. If this story meant something to you, if you felt even a fraction of what he felt, don't scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe. Let someone else see what his eyes were trying to say. Because sometimes, it's not the bark that saves us. It's the silence that never looked away.